Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Our hearing today will now come to order. I want to begin, actually, by speaking on the topic not particularly germane, and that is to acknowledge the tremendous contribution of the ranking member of this committee, of our subcommittee, that is Mr. Inglis, who is a dear friend, a respected colleague who can't be with us today. He had an election yesterday, and from this member of Congress's perspective, it was a remarkably unfortunate result. He is an outstanding human being, a great asset to this committee and to the country, and I appreciate deeply his many years of service. I also should note that we've been informed that the administration witness who we had hoped to join us today will be unable to visit, to participate, but we've received assurance that he or another member of the administration will come and talk to us about this very issue at some future date. Given all they're dealing with down in the Gulf, we certainly can understand that and look forward to that testimony at some point in the future.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Mr. Radoil.
I would like to join you in your accolades of Mr. Inglis. He is, I served with him both times he was in the Congress, and after his hiatus and he returned, he was a different person. Very, very dedicated to this country and also preserving its environment, but in a reasonable, sensible way. And I think he provided a lot of good leadership on this committee in his very quiet, subtle way. And our Congress is the worst for not having him around in the future. So thank you.
I thank you and obviously share that remark and very much appreciate it. Bob, by the way, is not dead. He's just had an unfortunate outcome and perhaps will have a better life for it. But at any rate, he has just been a great member of the committee and he will be missed. I also, so today's hearing is,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hall, please.
They may not know that he was voted back to private life.
That's a nice way to say it.
He didn't pass away.
That's right. Our hearing today is to discuss technology standards and practices to ensure safer deepwater and ultra-deepwater drilling. A wide range of technologies, technological innovations have allowed the industry to venture into ever deeper waters to produce the massive reserves of oil and gas found there. Admittedly, the payoff of pushing the technology envelope is enormous, and for the foreseeable future, we are likely to be reliant on fossil fuels, though I hope we will gradually and as soon as possible reduce that reliance for a host of reasons. But the Deepwater Horizon tragedy proved that in a high-stakes game, poor judgment and faulty equipment can bring unimaginable consequences. It's precisely because this incident occurred at 5,000 feet of water that we are discussing an ongoing spill 64 days after it began. Committee staff and I just returned from visiting the Deepwater Horizon response efforts in the Gulf. And I want to pay my respects to the people down there who are working so hard. They are working 24/7 in extremely difficult conditions. We spent 2 days doing flyovers on the ground, on the water, met with them, and I asked a group of folks in an integrated command system, what can we do to help? And the first thing that was interesting was they looked at me like I was from Mars, and they said, are you serious? Because we're not used to politicians asking how we can help. Usually what you do is get off an airplane, make a bunch of critical comments, and get back on the airplane. And what they said, the single most important thing we can do is tell the public about the good work that is being done, not in any way to minimize the enormity of the spill or the loss of the human life or the consequences for the environment, but people are doing all they can. Every branch of government virtually is represented down there. All branches of uniformed services are there with their assets, 30-plus thousand people. It's 100-plus degrees out there, and they're working very, very hard in dangerous conditions with shifting weather and a challenging and unpredictable adversary in the form of the oil. And they're doing some really remarkable work in what is the largest recovery and restoration effort in the history of humankind. And they deserve our admiration and respect and appreciation. And it is time, I think, for all of us in the Congress to get past sort of the blame game, that we need to understand it. But the goal really is to try to solve the problem for the future, and that's the purpose of this hearing. And I think it's important to say that it's not only the federal agencies, and we met with NOAA, NIMS, Coast Guard, EPA, MMS, but also BP's got a lot of folks down there, and they're working hard. and doing a good job. And I'm proud to say a lot of folks from many of our states are there. I met Texans, I met Washingtonians, I met Michiganders and people from the D.C. area. Every state in this country's got people down there working, and they deserve our appreciation. And my personal goal is that at some point soon, we will have, if they're still insisting on having the spill image up, that right beside that is an image of the recovery and restoration efforts, because those deserve equal credit, and that's where the real human beings are working really hard on the surface of the water and on the shores. Having said that, our charge today, however, is to understand the technological advances and best practices to ensure that drilling in the deep water can be done, if it is to be done, with minimal risk to workers and the environment. Operational safety, or operating safely in such extreme environments, entails immense engineering and technological challenges, the complexity of which is encountered in few other human endeavors. The technological expertise that for drilling at these depths appears to reside almost solely right now with the private sector. And in the hyper-competitive field of energy, the industry is rightfully guarded about sharing information and collaborating on proprietary technological development. But safety interests are universal, and we lost 11 lives in this instance. We must now ask ourselves if the Deepwater Horizon tragedy calls for us to reevaluate the government's role in the development of accident prevention and mitigation technologies and in industry best practices. And I would assert here as well that I would hope shareholders will pay attention to this, instead of just asking what our return on investment is and what's the latest reservoir. I hope shareholders will start asking, it is consequential to our market value if we have a spill, and the people of BP have learned that the hard way. But it's rare that shareholders look at the quarterly reports with a careful eye to what's being done on safety and accident prevention. I hope they'll start, and corporate boards will be a lot more attentive to that. It should not be the sole responsibility of the Congress. So our goal today is to shed light on these important questions, and with that, I yield to our distinguished ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Hall, my friend from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding the committee. And as the response effort on the Gulf enters its third month, we're beginning to get a more clear picture of what went wrong on the Deepwater Horizon and what needs to be done to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I hope and expect the S&T committee to play an important role in this effort, particularly as we inform and contribute to the legislative package that the House will pursue in July. This package may seek to address and provide guidance on whether or not a short-term or permanent moratorium on deepwater drilling is necessary. As is evidenced by yesterday's granting of injunctive relief by the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Louisiana, suspending the enforcement of the administration's 6-month moratorium, more time is needed to craft a reasoned and measured response and solution to this incident and to others like it. It's important to remember that prior preparation and understanding provide the best foundation for long-term solutions. The economic impact of the moratorium would be deep and lasting. Thousands of people have lost their jobs already, and an estimated 40,000 additional jobs hang in the balance as the uncertainty associated with the moratorium remains unsettled. Beyond jobs, the moratorium would also introduce a significant new environmental risk. The enormous global demand for drilling rigs would be likely to result in their departure from the Gulf to other countries, increasing U.S. dependence on imported oil and on oil tankers, which are much more prone to spills than undersea pipelines. The moratorium would also drive skilled workers off the rigs and onto the onshore jobs, meaning that a high percentage of new, less experienced workers will be responsible for operations when drilling resumes. These events related to the moratorium would appear to increase, not decrease, environmental risk, while inflicting economic damage on the people of the Gulf that would rival, if not surpass, that caused by the spill itself. I hope that today's hearings will be informative in this regard, and I'm pleased that we have some of the world's leading drilling technology experts before us. I hope the witness can help the committee better understand the contributing factors to the Deepwater Horizon disaster, particularly as it relates to the soundness of the drilling technology itself versus the practices governing its use and its application. The evidence gathered thus far indicates that technology concerns may not have been at issue. Rather, it seems a failure to follow industry-wide best practices created an environment ripe for a blowout. If this is indeed the case, it's my hope that these procedural shortcomings can and will be quickly addressed. I've heard from experts in the well intervention and oil spill containment fields that state-of-the-art technology currently exists in the form of state-of-the-art vessels and systems designed to respond to such situations, and now finally being used to contain the BP spill itself. In discussions with these experts, it's been noted that a missing piece of an effective oil spill policy is planning for containment. I'm interested in hearing more about how these technologies can be incorporated into the process so effective and for planning and containment becomes the norm. Regardless of the ultimate causes and of best responses to the disaster, it makes sense to continue pursuing improvements to deepwater drilling architectures and systems which will only increase its safety. In 2005, I helped create a program to do just that at the Department of Energy known as the Super 999 or Ultra Deep Program. It supports cutting-edge technology through a collaborative effort between DOE and industry into safe and environmentally responsible offshore and onshore oil and gas development. This program has been a success. Its contributions to deepwater drilling technologies are helping us recover energy supplies that we knew existed but were unable to access. This has returned significant benefits to taxpayers in the form of domestic jobs and affordable energy, as well as increasing royalties to the fund that pays for the program in the first place. Unfortunately, and despite the program's strong record of support in Congress, the administration has repeatedly, both administrations, Republicans and Democrats, have repeatedly called for its termination. It's also zeroed out funding for oil and gas R&D within the fossil energy program at DOE. I think this represents a clear misprioritization, and I hope the administration will reconsider its position in light of the Section 999 program's potential to advance safe and environmentally responsible drilling. Unfortunately, the administration inexplicably backed out of this commitment to testify before our committee at the last minute, so we won't get a chance to discuss the position on Section 999 today. I thank the witnesses that kept their commitments for appearing before us today, and I realize that you're very busy, very valuable hours to spend, and that you give up something to come before us because we rely on you to tell us what's best for the greatest good of the greatest number of this country, and we know that you're making a contribution to us, and I appreciate you being here and appearing before us today, and I look forward to the testimony and the discussion. Mr. Chairman, to a good chairman, I yield back whatever time I have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hall. I acknowledge the presence also of the full committee chair, Mr. Gordon, who has been a champion of safety and environmental protection and development of technologies. I understand Mr. Gordon has no opening comments to make, but thank you for being here, Mr. Chairman. As we all know, my colleagues will know well, if there are other members who wish to submit opening statements, those will be added to the record at this point. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our first panel of witnesses at this time. Mr. James Pappas is the Vice President of Technical Programs at the Research Partnership to Secure Energy for America. My staff here has given me the acronym, as we all know, as RPSEA, but unfortunately the way they've written it, it sounds like RIPC as SEA, which is rather unfortunate. Dr. Benton Baugh is the president of Radoil Incorporated. Dr. Erik Milito is the group director of Upstream and Industry Operations at the American Petroleum Institute. Did I say that right?
No, you just gave me a doctorate, and I appreciate that.
Well, I've got a doctorate. I'm not sure that's a promotion. So you pick. I'll call you whatever you want. But if we say there's a doctor in the house, we won't look at you. And Mr. Greg McCormack is the director of the Petroleum Extension Service at the University of Texas in Austin, a very distinguished and capable group of witnesses. As we discussed prior with the witnesses, you have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. We'll have lots more time after that in the Q&A with the panelists, so you'll have more time. And feel free at some point, if we haven't asked a question but you think it's important, feel free to sing out on that. We'll try to lead things in a good direction here, but if there's something really critical, let us know. When you've completed your spoken testimony, we'll begin with questions. Each member of the panel in front of us will have 5 minutes, or each member of our panel will have 5 minutes to question a witness. And with that, Mr. Pappas, please begin. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I represent RPSEA, and the Marine Technology Society also asked me to represent it today. The Research Partnership to Secure Energy for America, RPSEA, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Through the Energy Policy Act of 2005, Section 999, RPSEA administers a public-private partnership that performs research and development for the ultra-deepwater Gulf of Mexico, unconventional onshore natural gas, and other petroleum resources in the United States, namely small producing companies. RPSEA has over 170 member companies, including 26 research universities, companies, and other organizations, and it manages $37.5 million per year of U.S. government funds plus cost share from project groups. Government funds are generated from royalties and distributed to RPSEA through NETL on behalf of the U.S. Department of Energy. RPSEA is unique in that we administer our program through a collaborative research environment that includes subject matter expert volunteers from leading research universities, vendor companies, and federal organizations, small operators, individuals, private labs, government labs, and offshore operators. Furthermore, RPSEA is proud and fortunate to have members from several prominent environmental and safety concerns within our ranks. The fully transparent process that we have has proved to result in high-quality technology and research development. We currently have 71 projects in progress or completed, and an additional 28 projects are in contract negotiations. I've been invited to discuss oil prevention and mitigation technologies in deep water, as well as standards for deep water gas and oil drilling. We pinpointed several areas of study: technology enhancement to minimize incidents. This program will identify and develop technologies to prevent incidents from occurring in the first place. These technologies will improve safety, protect the environment, and ensure wellbore integrity of offshore operations. The program should consist of an evaluation of existing safeguards and international offshore procedures, standards, and practices. It should also identify promising technologies to address safety and environmental concerns associated with deep water, harsh environments. Identification, development, and improvement of proactive and reactive response procedures and processes will address the research required to minimize response time to an incident so that environmental impact is also minimized. The industry has various vessels and equipment on standby used to contain spills, to skim, or to deploy dispersants. A research program should be established to identify state-of-the-art technologies and methodologies and identify other necessities to enhance response to an emergency situation. This program can also include early warning sensors to identify potential hazards to the environment. Development of an understanding of the value of ecosystems services and location identification of high-value and seasonally dynamic ecosystems. This goal of this program would be to study deep water coastal regions in the Gulf Coast wetlands in order to identify high-value areas and to place monitoring and early warning devices in there. RPSEA has several research projects that relate to safety and environmental studies ongoing already. In addition, every project that RPSEA has in this program is required to employ a level of understanding of safety and environmental impact. Example projects are detailed in my written statement. They include the self-standing riser system that has recently been developed with an ongoing demonstration project for use in deep water well interventions. This technology can enable operators to do various deep water tasks more safely. RPSEA, through its oversight by the Department of Energy, stands at the forefront of development of systems to enable industry to improve energy security. The Research Partnership to Secure Energy for America uniquely provides the structure for researchers and other interested parties from a multitude of research universities, environmental organizations, safety concerns, companies, and others to exchange ideas, transfer technologies, and provide unbiased science to develop sound policy so that industry can operate in a safe manner. It is because of the role of the federal government through the EPAC Section 999 program that RPSEA has been successful and that its members are willing and anxious to participate, to lead in these activities that are so important to our country. Funding currently is not sufficient to pay for all of our projects that have been recommended by our expert review panels. Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to discuss the ongoing research and needs related to deep water spill prevention and mitigation.
Thank you, Mr. Pappas. Dr. Baugh.
My name is Benton Baugh, and I've been asked to give testimony on the current state of the drilling equipment and whether or not it provides an adequate level of safety for doing deep water drilling. And it is my opinion that the systems are currently developed to a state that they are completely adequate to provide protection to the environment, the safety to personnel. My opinion is based upon working in this industry for more than 50 years, having received more than 100 U.S. patents primarily in this area, and specifically having received a patent on almost every subassembly of a deepwater drilling system. Subsea drilling has existed for about the same 50 years, from the early 60s when it was considered to be ultra-deep drilling to drill in 250 feet of water, to now where we're commonly making equipment for 10 and 12,000 feet of water. Overall, there's an impressive safety record for having drilled in this time. The subsea business that we're talking about, and I'll be talking primarily from the point of view of a manufacturer, the subsea business system is dominated by three major manufacturers. Each of these have highly specialized safety systems, highly developed manufacturing systems, and each of them have ISO quality certification and follow conventional practices of design, testing, and verification of their equipment. You can fully expect that any equipment in the field has been pressure tested to 50% higher than the pressure we'll ever see in the field. It's been loaded to loads 50% higher than any load it's ever expected to see in the field. You can also expect that this equipment is regularly tested in the field and is certified on an ongoing basis to maintain the quality of the equipment. The company I work for is a second-level company, and that means that basically we sell equipment to a first-level company who provide it directly to the operators. On the first slide you see here, this is a set of reels which we would provide to a company like one of the major first-level companies. The yellow and blue reel there handle electrical umbilicals that go down and control the control pods on the seafloor. The white one will be a hydraulic hose that takes hydraulic power down and provides power for the systems on the seafloor. What you see on the left of this slide is an ISO 9001 certification which our company has received. It is a certification that we have systems in place to maintain quality and traceability of all the equipment that we do. It's a very difficult certificate to get for a manufacturer. On the right side is a type approval certificate, which is for a piece of equipment, which says not only as a third party, in this case Detnordi Veriscus, has certified that we have good equipment, but they have it certified as a standard type of equipment. So in the future, anything similar to that is automatically approved because they have done a complete analysis on it. On this slide, what you'll see is what we call a FAT test. We do this on every piece of equipment that leaves our company. On the left side is simply the cover sheet of it. On the right side, what you see is page 10 of 15 of the FAT test. And what you'll notice coming down is on the sort of the left column, there will be a signature by the Radoil employee that confirmed that this step was successfully accomplished during this FAT test. Toward the center of the page, you'll see little round circles. That means that the customer's inspector has come and has certified that this has successfully passed the test as specified. On the right, there's an oval stamp. That's the American Bureau of Shipping. That says a third party has come in and has certified that it has passed these steps in the test. This happens over 15 pages on these reels, and this is characteristic of what you would expect in the offshore industry. All of our products don't require this level of quality, but this is characteristic of what you expect to see if something goes offshore. Again, these are practices that you would expect of all the first-level manufacturers. If there's an obligation, basically, that if a manufacturer buys something from an ISO-certified supplier, you automatically get accepted as a supplier. If, as for instance, we choose to accept some equipment from someone that's not ISO certified, it functionally becomes our requirement to do the ISO certification for them. We must do the inspection. We must do all the things to make it good. Again, this is what you expect from these first-tier providers. They provide good equipment. It is very well certified. The well that we're talking about here is not something where they were doing experimental things, pushing the envelope. It was drilled in about 5,000 feet of water. It's very likely that this very same rig had drilled in at least 10,000 feet of water, and I can assure you if it hadn't drilled in 10,000 feet of water, it was most likely certified to be able to drill in 10,000 feet of water. There's very little difference in when you go offshore between drilling in 1,000 feet of water and 10,000 feet of water. It's just wet. The biggest change you see is what happens on the nitrogen accumulator banks, and that's a well-studied subject. But basically, there's very little difference in 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 feet of water. This is highly capable equipment. Again, the actual cause of what we're talking about here may never be known. Depending on how we get closure on this particular well, it could be cemented up right at the top and never touch it and not ever take a chance on the thing. but it appears reasonable that there's a good chance it had nothing to do with equipment. It had to do with the way some operations were done, other things. It is potentially not an equipment problem at all.
Dr. Baugh, I'm going to ask you to conclude at this point.
Oh, yes.
We've got 5 minutes per witness, and I'll just...
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. There will be other points you want to make. I'm sure we'll have a chance to do those in questioning. Mr. Milito.
Good morning, Chairman Baird, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to address deepwater technology, research, and development. My name is Erik Milito, and I'm the Upstream Director for the American Petroleum Institute. API has more than 400 member companies, which represent all sectors of America's oil and natural gas industry. Our industry supports 9.2 million American jobs, including over 170,000 in the Gulf of Mexico related to the offshore development business. And this industry provides most of the energy that America needs. First, our thoughts and prayers go out to families who have lost loved ones, to the workers who were injured, and to our neighbors in the Gulf who are affected by this tragic accident. In testimony just last month, Secretary Salazar said the offshore oil and natural gas industry is a very highly regulated industry. Indeed, offshore operators are subject to 27 statutory authorities, 88 CFR parts in terms of the federal regulations, and 27 permits and approvals. All these apply to offshore operations. However, our industry's top priority is to provide energy in a safe, technologically sound, and environmentally responsible manner. We thus take seriously our responsibility to work in cooperation with the government to develop practices and equipment that improve the operational and regulatory processes across the board. We support the government's ongoing review of the incident and the existing systems in place. The industry will take the necessary steps to prevent accidents like this from occurring again. As further proof of our commitment, API has been the leader for nearly 9 decades in developing voluntary industry standards that promote reliability and safety through proven engineering practices. API Standards Program is accredited by the American National Standards Institute, the authority on U.S. standards, and undergoes regular program audits to ensure it meets ANSI's essential requirements. API standards are developed through a collaborative effort with industry experts, as well as the best and brightest technical experts from government, academia, and other stakeholders. API maintains more than 500 standards, which include recommended practices, specifications for equipment, codes, technical publications, reports, and studies that cover all aspects of the industry, including 240 focused on exploration and production activities related to offshore development. The standards are normally reviewed every 5 years to ensure they remain current, but some are reviewed more frequently based on need. In the case of the Deepwater Horizon incident, we're already going to work, and we have activity in place to review standards and develop new standards already. API standards are frequently referenced in federal regulations because they are recognized to be industry best practices. The Minerals Management Service references 78 API standards in its offshore regulations. Overall, nearly 100 API standards are referenced in more than 270 citations by government agencies, including the Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Department of Transportation, and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, in addition to the MMS. Complementing our standards program, API has a separate industry quality program. First established in 1924, the API Monogram Program provides for the consistent and reliable manufacture of equipment and materials in accordance with our standards and recommended practices. The program grants manufacturing licenses for more than 70 API equipment specifications. The Monogram Program is governed by consensus committees consisting of technical experts from the industry, government, academia, and other stakeholders. More than 5,000 licenses have been issued to some 3,000 facilities in 70 countries, to companies ranging from small firms to multinational corporations, making a wide range of equipment. The industry is committed to a goal of 0 fatalities, 0 injuries, and 0 incidents. Appreciate the Chairman's comments at the outset, which recognize the efforts in the Gulf region, and the industry is committed to helping out in those efforts and has already taken steps to look across at what the industry is doing throughout offshore operations to elevate industry standards to make sure that we have the best systems in place. Immediately following the incident, the API and the industry as a whole assembled the world's leading experts to conduct a top-to-bottom review of offshore drilling procedures, from operations to emergency response. 2 industry task forces that are addressing issues related to offshore equipment and offshore operating practices delivered recommendations to the Interior Department last month. In fact, the Interior Department report of May 27th actually includes a lot of the recommendations made by industry with regard to equipment and procedures. 2 other task forces to address subsea well control and oil spill response have also begun their work. We intend to use any findings from the incident investigation to continue to improve the technologies and practices to achieve safe and environmentally sound operations. As part of this process, we will work to develop new API standards and revise and adapt existing standards to raise the bar of performance. We look forward to providing constructive input as this committee, the Congress, and the administration consider changes to existing policy. This concludes my statement, Mr. Chairman, and I welcome questions from you and your colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milito. Mr. McCormack.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee and staff, thank you for inviting me to present and talk about training. Training is the key to safe application of industry technologies. You may wonder why the University of Texas is here to talk about training. The University of Texas is a land-grant institution, which meant when it was first established over 100 years ago, it was given 3 million acres out in West Texas. The 3 million acres then were worth nothing. But guess what? We found oil and natural gas on those 3 million acres. And so it became quite important to the university system. Back in 1944, the industry found itself with a skill gap shortage. The legislature, the state of Texas, mandated that the university would provide training to the oil and gas industry, and we've been doing that ever since. We provide not only training, we provide training material and audio visuals to the industry. We've trained Mineral Management Service, Bureau of Land Management, Homeland Security, JWAC, and most of the companies that are involved in the petroleum industry. I personally have worked in the industry for 40 years and have seen many changes. And what hasn't changed is the impact and technologies on this industry. It has been a technology-driven industry almost right from the inception. Training is a critical component of this industry, but it has not improved at the same speed as the technology has. As a trend I have observed over 40 years, a shift from an investment-based industry to a more cost-focused business. Technology drives down cost. Unfortunately, training is looked at as cost and not an investment. Without appropriate training, technology comes with risk. Today, training is down 25% over the training that was done in 2008. I would challenge the industry through their associations to have their members step up and increase their funding for training. The American Petroleum Institute, respected worldwide, a leader in setting standards in many places for the industry, should also be a leader in training standards. I notice a very direct correlation to profitability of the industry and the amount of investment in training. With fluctuating profitability, there's a fluctuating in training, and it should not be surprising that the results and effectiveness of training fluctuates as well. For the most part, the industry has created relevant content that should allow anyone who is trained in this content and passes appropriate testing to become knowledgeable about drilling rig safety and drilling rig operations. But training is not experience. This industry currently is losing experience at a faster rate than it is gaining it. So we have a problem with experience attrition. One of the other real issues at hand is the growing multi-generational aspects of the workforce with its mix of 4 distinct generations with disparate life experiences, varying ways of communicating, and distinctly different goals for professional careers. We have not learned how to train this multi-generational workforce. The days of cheap oil are over. The great technological challenges in locating, drilling for, and producing hydrocarbons have taken a quantum leap forward in complexity. Unfortunately, training has not kept up with that complexity. New technologies and training are invaluable. Ironically, it is the new generation who invented many of the new multimedia technologies. Fortunately, they're also very comfortable with them, using them. Though online training has existed for some time, in most cases it's not been very interactive or intuitive. It is therefore necessary to rethink and reposition online training in formats that are familiar to newer generations of professionals. What can the government do? I think the government can step in and look at the best practices of training that are underway today and pull those together and communicate them to all parties. It could include a training reporting system similar to the financial reporting system. They could audit the effectiveness of training providers. There is a great spectrum of training providers with great capabilities and some with not great capabilities. The third area is to encourage the industry to fund fundamental research in how to train and retain the multi-generational workforce. Billions are spent on research, $500 million cumulatively spent on alternative fuels. I know of no funds that are being expended on research on training methodologies.
Thank you, Mr. McCormack. I thank all the witnesses. You hit that mark on time, and much appreciated. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Following that, we'll recognize the members in alternating order. Very important and informative testimony, and I want to, if I may, use the expression, drill down on a little bit of it here. Mr. Baugh, I was actually a little bit surprised, and I think a lot of people might be surprised by the statement that you made, and maybe I'm not understanding it well, but the current state, you said, and it's in your written testimony as well, the current state of technology of subsea drilling systems is completely adequate to provide an appropriate level of safety, control wells being drilled, protect the environment, provide safety to the personnel. If that's so, why are we having this hearing?
Serious mistakes were made. Sorry, obviously some serious mistakes were made, and you have people involved in the system. If I were going to fault the system, it would not be the equipment out there that is well developed. Sooner or later, you're going to have a problem such as the one we have here, and we have not done a good job of the contingency equipment to go out and capture this spill. But I mean, I would suggest to you that the equipment itself is well developed. The downstream systems are not as well developed.
But there are reports that some of the last line of defense equipment appears to have failed. Now, given the nature of the problem, we don't know exactly why that is, and I understand the Deepwater Horizon folks and BP are trying to understand it. But it seems that this was a combination of hardware and human failure. And so the question for me was, what I'm really concerned about is if we were to take that quote at face value, it would sort of imply that, hey, there's nothing to worry about. And there's a lot to worry about somewhere. And I just really I'm worried when people say we don't have to worry because everything's fine.
No, I do think you need to worry. We have a good set of equipment out there at this time. At all points in history, you need to be continuing to develop better safety systems, keep on doing R&D, and look at the next thing. We have not done the next thing, which is basically to say sooner or later you're going to get some kind of a leak, and the next one will be different than this one. But we have spent all of our money getting out and drilling. We have not done a good job of capturing a potential spill, whether or not it be from a tanker or from a pipeline rupture, just rupture in the earth, a blowout. But I've studied and tried to get all the information I could on this particular incident. I mean, I literally have designed every piece of equipment that you're talking about, and the bits of information that you're getting are conflicting. There's something strange happened here.
Okay.
And I want.
Well, I appreciate that. That helps me understand where you're coming from. Let me pick up on something you said and go to Mr. McCormack. You know, some years ago, right here in this city, there was a tragic aviation accident where an airplane iced up while waiting to take off and went into the Potomac, and a lot of lives were lost. Subsequent to that and other aviation accidents, FAA looked a lot at human communication. They realized that you can build the best airplane in the world, but if the people flying it don't operate it according to its specifications, you're going to have a problem. I'm curious, and Mr. Pappas, maybe you can address this, Mr. McCormack, what percentage of our research goes into the kind of things Mr. McCormack was saying in terms of how to better train people for RPSEA, and what percentage of it goes to the human factor side? In FAA, they changed the flight deck rules. It had been basically pilot is God, co-pilot is passenger, and if God says you go. FAA changed that. There are now co-gods in the aircraft, and if one says, I don't think it's safe, that person has a career protection for saying so for the best interest of the safety of the passengers. What have we done in the API? Any of you want to? I'm very interested in this question because my read of it is there were hardware, physical failures of equipment, but there are also failures to wire it correctly, failures to install it correctly, apparently, and apparently grievous decision differences between BP and Deepwater about how fast to move forward. What do we know about human factors? Mr. Pappas, from RPSEA's perspective, then we'll work on down.
All right, I'll start. Thank you. We have one project that we got on our onshore program that considers that. What it's looking at is a combination of smart systems and utilization of the new technologies to help people decide when to turn on, turn off equipment, when to move forward and move back. It's a different way of learning. And what we're trying to do is we're focusing it on the onshore program right now, specifically for the unconventional resources. The reason we're doing that is that there are many systems around, but a lot of times they're not compatible with each other. They don't talk well. They don't play well. And the issue is that there's many different companies that develop these things, and what we have to do is we've got to find a way to put them together in a systematic way so that they create a logical response that covers all bases and doesn't make mistakes. So that's what we're looking at specifically in our program.
Mr. Milito?
I think the point that I'd like to make on this is that, you know, when we're looking at this, we're looking at it from a prevention standpoint. You don't even want to get to the blowout preventer. And to that end, what the industry is doing is looking at the best ways to have the procedures and the well design in place so you don't have conflicts of opinion as to how you design it, so that you've elevated the design of the well and the operating practices to a point where there is no question as to how you're going to do it. You're going to have the barriers in place. You're going to have the casing strings done in the way that is the highest level of performance. So if any of these human factors could potentially arise, they would be resolved already because of the standards in place. So what the industry is doing a review across the industry to elevate everybody to a point where the standard is at a higher level.
So if there is a conflict, somebody could say, I disagree with you, you're violating standard, but what do they do if the person paying their salary insists they violate it?
Well, you know, we're open to a system where, you know, those people should be empowered to be able to raise that question, and if need be, you stop any kind of operations if there's a safety issue. Safety is the priority, and if there is a safety question and there are operations ongoing, there should be an opportunity there to make sure that does not occur.
Mr. McCormack, very briefly, because I've exceeded my own time here. So
98% of the operations on a drill rig are very routine. It's the 2% that are not routine. We train towards the technologies. We don't train the soft skills where communication, chain of command. We don't bring the whole team together and train them that way. That really does need to be done. We need to be doing a lot more research in that area. We're doing so little research and training. It's disappointing.
thank you very much. Appreciate the witnesses. Mr. Hall's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Baugh, you apparently hadn't concluded your presentation. Could you do that if I'm kind enough to give you half of my 5 minutes, could you do it in that?
Okay, as a practical matter, the remainder of my presentation is exactly what you said, and you said it far more eloquently than I could. You basically said it. I was going to suggest that there are one thing addition was that there's some specific areas that we should be funding research in, specifically tertiary control systems for subsea BOP stacks and more comprehensive ROV control systems for BOP stacks, and upgrading shear ram actuators as are specific areas that we need to be doing development work in. But other than that, you said it very well.
And to go off the record, I'm a Texan. I'd have to ask you, are you related to Sammy Baugh?
Very distantly, but not enough to have done me any good.
Wouldn't make you very. It wouldn't help you much in Dallas because he owns all the records that the Redskins have up here for a lot of years. But a great guy and a great football player, just died a few months ago.
Yes.
I want to go to a court ruling last evening. Last night, Secretary Salazar announced that he's going to be issuing a new moratorium that addresses the shortcomings that the court set out. And as knowledge of the causes of the blowout continues to grow, he says a moratorium is going to be proven necessary and just. I don't know how he arrives at that. He's simply going to issue a new one. I don't know how many moratoriums or how many more he has in line to as fast as the court knocks them down, but that he can dig up. But Luckily, we have the three branches of government, and the courts get the last guess at what the law is, whether it's us congressmen doing it or some bureaucrat. And right now, that knocking out the moratorium just looks to me like another step by this administration to lessen our dependency on energy that we have here, that we know we have here, and that we ought to be getting here.
I do have a suggestion on that. A blanket moratorium, which is what we have right now, is only punitive and does damage to everybody. We need to establish what I would call a rig moratorium, where you shut down every rig at the next convenient stopping point and recertify that rig to pass its FAT test, its systems integration test, and you certify every rig individually. And when a rig certifies that it is good, it is as it's supposed to be, let it go back to work. At that point, you either put people back to work or you put them to work making the rig right, but you have people gainfully employed rather than unemployed.
Well, from his statement, it's clear that he's convinced that a moratorium is necessary to ensure the safety of drilling operations and protect the environment. Considering the evidence of the spill, you've seen this far and the increased risk posed by a moratorium that you mentioned in your testimony, and I thank you for that. I ask this question: is there any scientific or engineering justification you can think of that would also pass muster in a rigorous peer review process that would justify a moratorium?
I think probably it's the opposite, because if you presume a moratorium is to determine some greater level of safety that you'd like to achieve, you're going to spend 6 months in a moratorium figuring out what to do, and then you need to tell the good people of South Louisiana that they're going to be out of work for 2 or 3 years while you implement whatever it is that justified you're having a moratorium in the first place. So I would see that a 6-month moratorium is not a credible thing. We're going to have a 2 or 3 year moratorium if we're going to accomplish something, or we're going to institute best practices, recertify rigs, put them back to work, and then continue to spend money, continue to do development, continue to train better. But basically, we need to be in the oil business while we're doing this.
I've almost. Would you like to enlarge any more on your opening statement? I have about 20 seconds left I can give you.
I think I've said everything I know. So.
Mr. Hall, if I could add to your discussion on a moratorium, I think we've already seen the administration take significant action in light of the incident, and the first thing they did is they went out and inspected 33 rigs and found only minor infractions. I think you're looking at things like expired eyewash bottles and things like that. But in addition to that, they came out with a notice to lessees, which is outlines the requirements that the operators have to undergo, and they're significant requirements. So steps have been taken to ensure safety. That's called the safety NTL. So measures are being taken, so you wonder why you need a moratorium when the safety measures are being put in place.
I don't think that justifies laying off the thousands and thousands of people that are going to be laid off, and that we're going to lose a workforce that we can't replace.
I agree with you. I mean, some of the economic numbers show hundreds of thousands of jobs at risk here.
I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Dr. Lipinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you holding this hearing. I think we've certainly heard a lot of talk about this disaster in the Gulf, and I'm happy that we're having a hearing now where I think we can actually look at some of the issues that we really need to look at instead of having a lot of heat. Hopefully some lights shed on what happened here and where we should move on in the future. I really want to focus on what the witnesses think that the putting us, maybe we have to put aside what has happened here. What do you believe is the real risk in the likelihood of such a disaster like this happening? Obviously, some people would say with the disaster that we now see in the Gulf, there is no risk worth taking. Obviously, with every, there's always going to be a risk, no matter what kind of, say we're just looking at energy, with any kind of energy, whether exploration or using that energy source, there's always going to be a risk. What do you really think the risk was before this happened of such an accident occurring. Obviously, there should be a calculation being made for this type of risk. So, would each of you would you place a percentage on the risk of this occurrence? I don't know if everyone feels that they can, but we'll start. If you don't think you can, just let me know that. Mr. Pappas?
Thank you, sir. First, I'd like to say that obviously people didn't recognize this as a risk at all.
I mean, there has to be, everyone has to say that there is some risk
Definitely.
of this happening, no matter how small it may be.
What I'm saying is it's obvious that the industry did not recognize it beforehand, and now they do. Now the industry does. RPSEA as a group is ready to do some work. We've got the people in place to do that. Now, regarding your question, the risk obviously was small, but disastrous. And, you know, if you have to put a number on it, is it 1 in 999,000? I've heard that number before, but I don't have any substantiation. The real problem is that we don't have all the facts right now. So the real question that I would have, that I would turn around and ask is, do you want to wait until you get more of the facts, or do you want to take a chance on what you know now and decide where you need to go? And the question really is a fundamental question.
Dr. Baugh?
I think there have been something like 4,000 wells drilled in water depth such as this since the last significant spill that we had from drilling. So that would be 1 chance in 1,000 something like this might happen. But there was, from all the information I see, there was really an odd confluence of events. As for instance, the casing hanger wasn't locked down. Potentially the casing hanger floated up and blocking the blowout preventers and is providing some restriction but allowing the blowout. And let's say if that is what happened, if we do something as simple as make sure that they lock down every casing hanger, this would never happen again. But it is equipment. Equipment does fail occasionally. It would be difficult to say that you're never going to have another spill like this. It would be a shame to say that we come out of this and we don't have equipment to collect this kind of a spill and take care of it. I want to assure you that if I'd come to you and said a year ago that we need to put $100 million aside to make sure that if a pipeline cracks, if a BOP splits open, whatever happens, that we go out there and be able to suck it up and take it onto vessels and properly take care of it. A year ago, I would assure you each of you would have laughed at me. This year, nobody's laughing. I would like to suggest to you that we end up with $100 million invested in the Gulf of Mexico and in the world, because someplace in Southeast Asia or something, there's going to be another leak that happens, and we need to be able to go down there and vacuum it up, process it, and take care of it on the spot, not spend 65 days trying to figure out how to do it.
Mr. Milito?
Yeah, I think prior to this event, we've had over 42,000 wells drilled in the Gulf of Mexico, over 2,000 of those in Deepwater, and nationwide in the offshore, over 16 billion barrels of oil produced, and of that, less than 1/1000% spilled. That being said, the industry understands there are risks, and over the course of the last 80 to 90 years, the industry has been working hard to continue to develop the best practices and technologies. Our standards program is continually updating documents. We recently had a new document come out on isolation of flow zones so that you can manage these types of situations, and we're recommending that be adopted by the government. In addition to that, Dr. Baugh mentioned casing hanger latching. That's something that Interior put in its report that should be done. So what I'm getting at is the administration has taken action on a number of items that should be included in offshore operations to ensure safety. And if these things are done across the board, I think you're minimizing the risk to even lower level so that we can safely operate.
Mr. McCormack, is there anything you can add?
Usually on a blowout, there's 7 to 11 events that occur that lead up to the blowout. Some of them are equipment, some of them are human intervention. We need to make sure that the human intervention succeeds. We need to train the people properly.
But is there I know I'm out of time here, but I think we need to look at, first of all, is there a calculated level of risk here? And I would assume that if you are engaged in this activity, that any company engaged in this would be calculating for themselves what the level of risk is and what can be done to lower that level risk. This isn't just something that we look at after an accident, but beforehand when you are engaged in such an activity. So this obviously is a catastrophic failure here and a disaster that no one wants to see. But if we're going to move forward with this drilling, we have to be looking at not only what caused this, but what at each point, where is the risk and where is the possibility, potential of that risk, calculating all that risk in making a decision. As policymakers, we need to make a decision of what risk are we willing to live with for having such a catastrophe happen again in the future. And I think that's what we should be looking at as we move forward, and where in the system, technologically, human factors, how we can really lower this risk.
Thank you, Dr. Lipinski. I want to recognize Dr. Ehlers now. Thank you. Sorry to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do not profess to be an expert on anything relating to the oil industry, but I did discuss this with someone who I do consider a fairly good expert. And this person went down and spent some time in Houston, talked to a number of the oil executives, people who are experienced in this field of drilling. There was a sort of a universal reaction to some of her questions along the line of, this could only happen to BP. This is a reflection of the feeling of a number of people in the industry that BP is less careful than most of the other companies that are drilling in the Gulf. I don't know if that's true or not, but it brought me up short that you are talking about equipment, we're talking about training. Those are all very important components, absolutely essential components. But are there companies, and I'm not going to point a finger at BP because I can't verify that, but are there companies that tend to pay far less attention just as a matter of company policy, either policy neglect or of intention, that they pay less attention to safety issues or issues of this sort than other companies do? In other words, are there some good citizens among the companies and some bad citizens? I'd appreciate any comments anyone could offer.
I'd like to respond to that if you don't mind. I think one of the problems is that BP has been one of the most aggressive companies. They've gone from not so much here to a lot. If you compare BP to Exxon, ExxonMobil, you would think ExxonMobil was much safer, and I think their actual record is safer. And so there tends to be a thing when you hire new people, you expand, you try to get the people that you can. There tends to be a little bit more of a risky situation, which is one of the primary reasons we would suggest that the moratorium is not a good idea. It sort of puts everybody right back in that mode. But I've personally been on several BP rigs, and my general impression of BP has been they've been so anal about safety, it was nauseous. The time it takes to get a permit to breathe on a BP rig is just drives me crazy. I work with a small company, and we pride ourselves on being quick and responsive. When I go out to a BP rig, I never get the feeling that we've got people here being dangerous or they're cowboys. I've always gotten the impression that they were very conscious of safety. I think that their real downfalling is they expanded rapidly. They're trying to do a lot of things. ExxonMobil is very staid, doing the same thing all the time, and so they have a good appearance of being very safe, but they're very conservative. And so BP probably has some cultural problems. They need to address it. I can assure you they'll be addressing it better after this time, but I would not characterize them as being a company which was just reckless. I think you see some individual decisions, people trying to catch up on their schedule, doing some things where people push the envelope some, but I would not characterize BP as just being a bad company.
Any other comments?
I think what we are seeing is BP did not take the most conservative approach in their operations in the Deepwater Gulf compared to other companies. And I think that's a fair statement.
In your opinion, is that likely to lead at some point to a disaster?
If you cumulatively don't take the most conservative approach and take the most aggressive approach, just building on what Mr. Lipinski says, you are certainly going to increase the risk factor.
I was also struck recently with 60 Minutes interviewed someone who worked on the rig, and had an interesting perspective, but he related the events that had gone up to it where at various points the BP person in charge had said, this isn't quite right, but we got to get this done. Have you heard any verification of that or that type of approach?
What I can say about that is the BP company man on the rig was a land-based man with very little experience on deepwater rigs. Deepwater rigs have a certain higher risk factor to them. Drilling processes are the same, but the risk factor for failure are much different. You cannot put someone on a exploratory well, which is the first well in that formation, that has very unknown activities that are going to occur during the period of drilling, and not have experienced people on representing both the company and both the driller.
Okay. Mr. Baugh, you wanted to add something? No. Okay. Any other comments? I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Next on our side is Eddie Brittings Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I need to ask, I guess, Mr. McCormack, isn't there drilling between the deep water that was being done and no drilling at all?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question, Ms. Johnson.
What this is, this particular incident was one of the deepest drilling in history, I understand. Isn't there other drilling that's not nearly as deep that has been successful?
Oh, this shallow water, which is anything less than 1,000 feet, has been incredibly successful. This is not the deepest well. They've drilled in 10,000 feet of water and gone down 20,000 feet, so a 30,000-foot well. So this is definitely not the deepest. Mm-hmm. But this is an exploratory well. This is in a new formation that hasn't been drilled into. You can make estimations of pore pressure and the temperatures and pressures that you're going to incur on that. But until you drill the well, actually, you don't know exactly what you're going to come across.
Has this been deeper in the Gulf of Mexico?
Yes, we've drilled deeper in the Gulf of Mexico.
If the drilling continued in more shallow water, would all the jobs be lost?
I'm sorry, I think part of that has to do with where the oil is. We've been operating in the Gulf for close to 50, maybe 60 years at this point, and we're really picking over bones and having to go out in these deeper waters where the oil, where we're allowed to get it. There's essentially been a moratorium in place off the Pacific and Atlantic coast, so there's a lot of oil in the deeper waters. The companies are able to find it there, and it makes business sense to go out there and develop it because that's where it is.
Excuse me, could I address that?
Sorry, go ahead.
You're really, I think, asking, is there a safer place to drill and a not so safe place to drill? And probably the distinction you're looking for is development drilling and exploratory drilling. Development drilling means they've already drilled into a formation and they have a good idea of what's there, and so they're just drilling more wells for production. Exploratory means you're drilling in, you don't know quite what's there, and you may hit a high-pressure pocket. And a compromise that you may be looking at a short term is allow people to continue drilling, but to do development drilling so that they are producing more oil and basically have a moratorium more along the idea of doing exploratory drilling where you're drilling into unknown formations.
Yes.
Short comment. Shallower wells closer to the coast are typically gas producers these days and not oil producers. As was mentioned, most of the oil has been pulled from those wells.
Anyone can answer this for me. What would you suggest that needs to be done to avoid this type of accident? I know that it's not a perfect situation where you can predict that it'll never happen again, but what improvements would have made a difference in this incident?
May I?
Yes.
Representative Johnson. As I mentioned earlier, RPSEA has a group of over 700 subject matter experts in the oil and gas business, and they run the gamut from environmental and energy companies, vendors, research universities, and interested parties, other interested parties. These experts are the people that we should ask that question of. It should not, in my opinion, be the decision of just a single group of people that have a dog in the fight. They all have to have different opinions, and we need to put those all together. In my estimation, we need to put this group together, and a group like RPSEA is one of those that is excellent at putting these diverse groups of people together. If we could do that and utilize the process that we have in place, won't take very much time at all. We can come up with a distinctive list of technologies that need to be looked at and technologies that are already in place, whether they be state-of-the-art or accepted already, to see which direction we need to go.
Anyone else?
Representative, all blowouts could be prevented. There are signs that are kicked, meaning oil and gas are entering the wellbore when you don't want it to be there. There are signs ahead of time. The problem when you're drilling this deep is the amount of time that you have to react is shortened. So you have to be able to respond much quicker, recognize and respond much quicker. But all blowouts can be prevented.
Thank you very much. My time has expired, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I've got Mr. Bartlett. Dr. Bartlett.
Thank you very much. Several days after the blowout, the Wall Street Journal had a fairly long article, kind of a moment-by-moment story of what was happening. I was struck with how detailed the permitting process was. It would seem to me they could hardly tighten a screw without going to the regulators and say, is it okay for us to do this? It seemed to me there was a very meticulous procedure for making sure that the regulators knew everything they were doing. Was there any time during these procedures that the regulators said, hey guys, aren't we cutting a few too many corners? Did that kind of an inquiry ever happen? It wasn't in the story. There was no indication in the story in the Wall Street Journal that ever happened. The reason I'm asking this question is that if you are subject to meticulous regulation, isn't there a shared guilt here if in fact there is some guilt? Isn't there a shared guilt here? If BP couldn't make a move without getting permission from the regulators, why is 100% of the blame placed on BP here? Help me understand that.
Mr. Bartlett, the inspector for the MMS had just come over 4 months ago from a production platform. Production platforms are completely different than drilling platforms. So we had basically a very inexperienced inspector from MMS making some of these decisions.
Yeah, my concern is that, you know, everybody did what they thought was the right thing here, and we end up, there were two entities involved in it. Clearly there's a very tight partnership here between the drilling people and the regulators, because I was struck with how frequently the drilling people had to go to the regulators, hey, is it okay for us? They just changed the size of a pipe, for instance. They got to go, is it okay to do this? And the answer is yes, it's okay to do that. So my question is, why do you think that we're assigning 100% of the blame to BP and the regulators are never, ever mentioned as being complicit in this problem? Yes, sir.
Representative Bartlett, I'll just give you my personal experience. From the times that I worked offshore, the Minerals Management Service representatives were very professional and in some cases were real pain in the neck for me. It was because they had such stringent requirements and we had to follow everything. And the relationship that I developed with those people was, on a personal basis, was purely professional, and I understood that they had a job to do, and that's the way I took it. Now, that being said, my understanding is that BP is being pinpointed because they're the operator of record, and that's the law. Besides that, I'm not sure I could help you.
But if they couldn't move without getting permission from the regulators, why isn't there some shared responsibility here? There is clearly a shared responsibility. I just don't see that noted in the press. Mr. Milito, you mentioned that we have now produced, what was it, 16 billion barrels of oil from Gulf drilling. Is that the number I heard?
The 16 billion is offshore development for domestic production activities.
16 billion.
And I would assume that, probably 90-some% of that is from the Gulf of Mexico, because that's really the only area that we have access at this point. There's some production off the coast of California.
It's kind of interesting to put this problem in some perspective. That 16 billion barrels of oil will last the world 192 days. Every 12 days, we use 1 billion barrels of oil. I think the significance of that escapes most people. Every day, we use 84 million barrels of oil. Check my arithmetic. I think 84 goes into 1,000 roughly a dozen times. Doesn't that mean that every 12 days, we use 1 billion barrels of oil? So we find a huge reserve out there, 10 billion barrels of oil. And we heave a sigh of relief. Gee, guys, no problem now. We got plenty of oil. That will last the world 120 days. Do you think there should be a broader recognition of the relatively trifling amounts of oil that are yet to be found compared with what we are using?
In terms of that there is a small amount yet to be found, or that?
Well, I don't think there's a whole lot yet to be found, and we use 1 billion barrels of oil every 12 days. You find 10 billion barrels of oil. That's a big find. That'll last the world 120 days. Big deal. My time is up, but I just think it's important to put this in context. And you really need to ask the question, do you think it's worth the risk? I have 10 kids, 17 grandkids, and 2 great-grandkids. We're leaving them a huge debt. I'd like to leave them a little oil. Is that okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bartlett. Mr. Tonko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have to respond to that last question. I agree with the sentiment. It is time for us to begin to explore new alternatives and renewable opportunities because of the limitations that face us. But that being said, Mr. Pappas, in your work with the Research Partnership to Secure Energy for America, how much of the research funding would you cite has been focused toward extracting technologies as compared to safety technologies?
Yeah, that's a real good question, and I would say that 8 of the 71 projects that we have are specific to environmental and safety side of the business. But every one of those projects has a component of environmental and safety to them. So we small parts of every project, but 8 are specific to environmental and or safety concerns.
And with the growth of investment in technology, there seems to be indication that reports from as much as 10 or 15 years ago, there were recommendations to invest much more heavily in technology. But then we see situations like that of, I believe it's May 2008, where an exemption was granted to BP, where a valve that perhaps could have been utilized that cost $500,000 could have avoided tens of billions of dollars of impact here. How would you characterize the exemption? Would it be because of overreach, or is it because of being deemed unnecessary or duplicative? What would technology explain is a reason for exempting a company like BP from that requirement?
Maybe I can answer that. I think what you're talking about is an acoustic switch that you can operate from the surface to close the blowout preventers. The blowout preventers failed, and an acoustic switch would not have been able to actuate the blowout preventers. So in this case, it would not have helped. In other cases, it might help.
If I can add to that, my understanding is all the rigs operating do have secondary means of shutting down the well and the blowout preventer. It may not be a requirement, but they do have that. But with regard to an acoustic regulator, there are some concerns about them posing other risks. And in the deep water, there's concerns about them being triggered by things like vessels passing by. And what's being recommended by the industry is we look at that type of equipment and technology to see where it would be best appropriate to include that, because we don't want to be increasing risk when we're trying to improve safety.
Okay, so with those increased risks or some of the awkwardness of utilizing that technology, why wasn't there a more aggressive approach to come up with the technology that would avoid all of that potential impact and have something that was streamlined and directed to do what it needed to do?
Well, as I was saying, I think most every rig has a dead man shutoff, which means when there's a separation in a riser from the BOP, that you're supposed to have an automatic shutoff. Or if there's a disconnect between communication from the BOP and the rig floor, you're supposed to be able to have an automatic shutoff. And this gets to what Mr. McCormack was talking about. The BOP wasn't functioning, so it wasn't how you control it. It was we really need to see the final results of the investigation to see why that thing didn't shut down.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no further question.
Thank you, Mr. Tonko. Mr. Rohrabacher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And let me note that I agree with Dr. Bartlett's analysis that we should be developing alternatives to our dependence on oil and gas right now. And I would suggest, however, that we cannot do that at the expense of not doing the research and development of technologies that we need to make sure that our current structure is safe. And I would suggest that that's exactly what's been going on here, in that we have, for example, last year the Department of Agriculture alone, their spending on basically global warming money, pardon me for bringing that up again, was 16% higher than all of the research and development in the DOE in terms of oil and gas. So just the money spent by the Department of Agriculture on global warming research was basically 16% higher than what we spent trying to make our own oil and gas safer. That's a false priority. I mean, yes, we have to prepare for the future, but you don't prepare for the future in a way that you have a greater emphasis than making sure that what you're doing today is safe. And apparently that's what's been going on. And I've been told that DOE fossil fuel research programs, that the DOD in their fossil fuel research programs, they're moving almost entirely towards the issues of capturing and storage of carbon, rather than safety and rather than trying to see how we can produce more oil and gas in a safer way. Again, that's a false priority based on this concept of global warming that I think has been directing or misdirecting our resources. Let me just ask a question here. Were the panel, from what you've seen in this catastrophe that we've had down in the Gulf, were all of the standards and accepted procedures, were they being followed? Or can we say that this tragedy is a result of not following accepted standards and accepted procedures?
I think at this point, we really have to wait to see the root cause analysis that comes out of the investigation. We're hearing a lot of reports in the media, and there is some talk about well-designed and operating procedures, but we really do have to wait. That being said, the industry did put together several task forces, 2 on equipment and operating procedures, and putting this incident aside, looked across to see what is being done at a higher level to elevate that.
Well, we have standards in place, and Mr. McCormack has made it clear that had we had everything going the right way and doing what was supposed to have happened, this would not have been a catastrophe. So I am assuming that the standards and the procedures were not being followed. and I understand, for example, safety equipment was not maintained. Is there anybody who understands that? Some of the safety equipment that should have gone into place, like you say, it should have functioned, that were not maintained properly? Batteries were not present and things like that?
I will say that one of the things that I had heard is that the blowout preventer had some of the valves that had been changed over, and there's a possibility that it may not have been properly inspected by a professional engineer. That is entirely possible. We'll have to wait and see and for the root cause.
Let's just note that there's risk in any endeavor. I mean, I fly an airplane every week, and sometimes there's airplane crashes, but we recognize that people have high standards, and the chairman pointed out a change of standards for airlines that made it very safer for us. We have to pay attention to training and standards and make sure that we have a very high level of commitment to that. And perhaps, again, there may not have been the commitment to this in British Petroleum as in some of the other companies, and that may have been one of the reasons. And so, but whenever we have any endeavor, there's going to be risk involved, and actually minimizing the risk is part of their job, but also it's part of our job, Mr. Chairman. And what I'm suggesting is that we have not, even in Congress, done our part, because we have had our priorities shifted away and money being spent on things that should have had less priority than making sure that our current dependence was on equipment and technologies that were reliable. So with that said, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And let me congratulate you, Mr. Chairman. This is an excellent panel, and you have done a great job of leadership in this issue, and I respect that.
Thank you. I would just, while my colleagues are all here, I hope we can get another trip down to the Gulf area. I was just there this weekend. Some of you came before or after I mentioned that. We're going to try to get another trip down there to see firsthand the work that is being done. So we'll try to give you advance notice on that. Mr. Lujan.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And before I begin my questioning, Mr. Chairman, I want to submit an article to the record from the Los Alamos Monitor that highlights two individuals that have come up with what appears to be a simple idea as well. And I know that as we're looking to make sure that we have a vehicle to be able to accept some of these thoughts and ideas for true vetting, that this is one that we want to make sure that we get a close look at. So if there's no objection, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask permission to submit this into the record. Mr. Pappas, given the events in the Gulf, it's become apparent that there's a need for new diagnostics and technology to monitor the state of the deep-sea wells and their safety equipment. The more we know about the well, deep under the ocean, its pressure, its flow rate, its composition, whether we're talking about gas, fluid, or mud, and the more we know about the state of safety equipment is important, such as the blowout preventer. The better we will be able to prevent accidents, and the more we'll be able to deal with accidents should they occur. There's DOE entities right now and brain trusts that are private and public that are engaging in diagnostic activity as we speak. Do you agree that there's a need to develop improved diagnostics, and if so, what diagnostics are most urgently needed?
Thank you. Representative Lujan, I think that we're moving in the right direction. Unfortunately, it's for the wrong reasons because of what's happened. But the notice to lessees that came out had some excellent recommendations to improve systems just to start with. I believe what we need to do is we need to dissect the issue, dissect it into its components and take a look at it and then see how it gets back put together into a system. We need to get those experts together to formulate where we need to go. Obviously, communications is an issue. Obviously, training is an issue, as was mentioned right now. Hardware is probably going to be an issue, not necessarily because it may be that it's adequate for right now, but will it be adequate in the future since we continue to move into deeper and harsher environments in both gas and oil drilling, and we all know that we need that as a bridge to get us to the next generation of energy. So, to start with, that's where we need to go. The programs that I outlined a little while ago, I think, are focused on the environment and on the safety issues. But every one of these components, I think, needs to be looked at from the environmental impact side and also from the safety side.
And with that being said, Mr. Pappas, how might RPSEA be better integrated with DOE's drilling research activities as well?
Yeah. We work very, very closely with the Department of Energy. We have meetings from time to time. We try to keep in touch. They have a complementary program through NETL that works with us very closely. So we're moving in that direction. One of the problems that we have is that money that was authorized was $100 million, but only $50 million was appropriated. As I mentioned, we have other projects that could have taken priority. And then in addition to that, what we've uncovered because of this recent catastrophe is that we could probably utilize another $100 million. And we probably still wouldn't have enough.
Mr. Milito, if we wanted to set up a focused, quick response DOE partnership with some of the efforts that we see underway now, a program to develop new safety diagnostics for deployment as soon as possible, do you have thoughts on if the Office of Fossil Energy or RPSEA would be a better location for partnerships and collaborations that you're engaged with now?
Yeah, it certainly should be something that we need to consider. We have to make sure that all the agencies that are doing the research are coordinating and collaborating with what the industry is doing. It's an effort that Congress, the administration, Department of Energy, Interior, and the trade associations need to work together on. So if there's a way to manage that and have the coordination, we should have that discussion and make sure it happens, because a lot of ideas are being generated. We're providing them to Interior, but if energy is going to play a significant role here, as it should, then we have to make sure that that discussion is had.
And is API now and the standards that are being developed, are you currently engaged with the evaluation of diagnostics to see what we can be doing better based on what we know that is occurring around the Gulf that we should be expecting to see in some of the reports soon to be released?
Some of the recommendations that have come out from the industry have to do with the blowout preventers and the remote operated vehicles, and a lot of those recommendations concern the testing that has to be done at the rig level as well as underneath the water. So we're moving forward with changes to the standards on BOPs and ROVs to address some of those issues. So that's occurring.
And any thoughts on how we might be able to better integrate with the DOE drilling research activities?
Same thing. We just have to have an open dialogue and make sure that, and our standard setting process is open to the government. David Miller, our standards director, is here, so we can make sure that we have an opportunity to have them as a participant or an observer, however DOE thinks that they would best fit in.
Appreciate that. And, Mr. Chairman, I know we didn't have time to get...
Mr. Lujan, could I add something very quickly?
Mr. Pappas.
One of the things that I see is that the function of government and the Department of Energy in particular is to look at the fundamental type of research. When it gets into application, it's probably best left to people that are a little bit closer to the industry. Now, the oversight may continue to be from the government level, but I believe that the subject matter experts sit down in Houston and offshore and in New Orleans and so forth, and those are the folks that we need to ask to get to application so that we can utilize what we best need. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, maybe along those lines, there's existing entrepreneurial leave programs that exist at the labs to work with small business startups. There may be a leave program along the lines where you can work and you can integrate these activities to best make sure that we're accelerating now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to follow up on some of the questions that Mr. Lujan had raised. Specifically, I want to go to the moratorium. A lot of discussion going on around here in the press and other places, I guess also in a federal court, about moratoriums. When the military in 2008 lost 2 T-38 trainers, jet fighter trainers, the Air Force stood down until they could figure out what's going on. The moratorium should be the same purpose. We've had a horrendous problem. Why did it occur? What are the elements of it? A moratorium, in my view, is absolutely necessary until we find out what goes on and what has gone on. You've described the difference between development and exploration. Understood. My specific question is, what is the industry doing in coordination with the Department of Interior on standards and procedures, including both the oversight of the government and the policy procedures and equipment that is to be used in the exploratory processes?
When we put together the task forces on equipment and operating procedures, this was shortly after Secretary Salazar had a meeting with the exploration and production presidents and vice presidents, quickly assembled them and quickly started having a dialogue with Interior Those task forces really came up with 3 buckets of recommendations that went to Interior. There's 22 recommendations. The first bucket has a lot to do with a lot of the discussion we've had, has to do with risk management, making sure that the drilling contractors have a safety program in place, making sure that the operators have a safety program in place, and making sure those 2 programs are talking. Then there's recommendations that have to do with operating procedures, making sure you have the appropriate barriers underneath the mudline, underneath the wellhead to ensure that hydrocarbons cannot breach the well. And then making sure you have the right interfacing between BOPs, ROVs, making sure that you have shearability. All those technical recommendations have been made. 16 of the 22 were accepted by Interior in its report. And then some of the other work, we have a recommended practice on isolating flow zones for drilling operations. We recommended that gets adopted, and we're moving forward with working, improving our standards on BOPs and ROVs. So there's a lot going on, and they're not stopping the work. They're going to continue to work in the long term.
It just, to wrap up this one question, it just seems to me absolutely essential that before we continue to do deep water exploration, that we have all of those procedures in place, including the oversight, review, and appropriate role of the Department of Interior's new organizational structure. Until that happens, we ought not do any more exploration. As to development, that's another question. The same things would apply. I think there would probably be different kinds of requirements. The next question, I think, Mr. Baugh, you raised this point. I want to go to it. In California, we have had since 1990 a very sophisticated oil spill response program. It does have in place funding. It does have in place materials, communication programs located in Southern California, Northern California, I think also in the central coast of California. Does such a program exist in the Gulf? And if so, is it sufficient? Obviously not sufficient. What would you do to make it better? $100 million was a number that you came up with a moment ago.
That number came out of thin air for what it's worth.
Sounds.
There are. You saw a lot of booms deployed in the Gulf of Mexico, which says there's a lot of response capability in the Gulf of Mexico. But I would suggest to you that we should not be sitting at the surface, letting the oil come to the surface, come to the beaches, and then try to collect it. We need to go to the site of the spill, and we need to vacuum it up and take care of it there, and not let it not let it pollute the beaches.
My question doesn't go to how we do it, but is there obviously there is not a sufficient program in place. The program in California is funded by the industry, both the transportation industry as well as the development industry. And it seems to me we must have such a program everywhere oil is drilled and developed and explored. Otherwise, we're going to be left with wondering, well, how are we going to deal with this? Would the industry, a question for all of you, would the industry support such a robust program in the Gulf area?
I think the problem is that individual companies have difficulty taking care of these systems. This is something that the federal government, MMS, should be very much involved in and directing. But literally, it may well be that you can get a high response characteristic out of. Do you know what a coiled tubing unit? Coiled tubing unit is. Okay. But basically, it's a rig which has 3.5-inch pipe you roll up like a hose. But it could be very small, very portable to be able to do a lot of things, and it could be here. It could go to California and do a lot of things. But there's a new generation of capability that needs to be done that's just not there, and MMS would be the appropriate people to take a lead in that.
Congressman, if I could add to that, the industry does support a robust program in the Gulf of Mexico. In fact, I think a lot of the activities that you see occurring are being occurred by the OSROs, the oil spill response organizations. Those are funded by the industry, and if there are improvements to be made, we need to make them.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'd recommend that legislation forthcoming deals specifically with this. California is a model, perhaps not the best. There may be other models around the United States, around the world, but we really must have in the Gulf and other places where oil is produced in the marine environment a very robust, ready-to-go program in place to deal with all the eventualities, whether it is shallow drilling, tanker pipes, or deep water drilling. It does not appear to have existed previously or presently in the Gulf, and we need to do that. My final point is just one very, very quick, and that is I'm the author of a ban on deep water drilling, new leases off the West Coast. I think it's absolutely essential. There's a lot of talk about, well, we're going to need oil. It is, in fact, true that several, 2 to 3 billion barrels of oil off the coast of California, in California waters, could be accessed from the shore. And in fact, you can get into federal waters 9 miles now with directional drilling. You don't need to be in the marine environment with all of the all too obvious hazards associated with the marine environment. And so we ought to think about that. However, Mr. Bartlett is quite correct. We have to move beyond oil. And that's the fundamental policy, Mr. Roybacher. That's the fundamental policy we ought to be pursuing. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the extra time.
Mr. Carnahan's next. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and our ranking member for calling this important and timely hearing on how we can make improvements to technology. I wanted to start really my first question of Dr. Baugh, and we have seen many studies over the last decade that have questioned the strength and reliability of the blind shear rams in terms of again, that suggest many of them do not function properly, and in fact, Transocean indicated that 11 of its 14 rigs in the Gulf have 2 blind shear rams. And I guess my question is, do you believe every blowout preventer should have 2 in terms of backup, but also are there things that can be done to improve the reliability as well?
Sorry. I would have a personal preference for dual blind shears on every BOP stack. It's just it becomes a single point of failure, and you would like to have no more single points of failure than practical. It will take a while to put them on there, and I think all industry needs to be moving in that direction. There are things that can be done to improve the ability to shear. We have a very small company, but we have an intensive research program, and we are personally working on ways to improve how you would shear drill pipe and potentially shear drill collars that are in the well. But there are not only needs to upgrade the ability to shear and shear reliably, but also there are times when you're going to put equipment in front of the shear rams that cannot be sheared, period. And we potentially need procedures so that whenever you're going to put something in front of the shear rams that cannot be sheared, you know it. Let's say potentially you stop and you wait 5 minutes and see if you get any flow of oil, but you check your returns to make sure there's nothing coming in from the formation before you put something in front of the rams. So I think we need procedure and equipment upgrades in this area.
And any others on the panel that want to comment to that, please?
I will. I would say that API recommended practice 17N addresses reliability for subsea equipment, and if we can utilize that to determine if additional improvements need to be made of any sort, that we should take advantage of that.
Do you think some of the data that suggests that the blind shear rams could only be counted on to fully activate about half of the time, is that consistent with data you've seen?
That is true.
Any others?
Yeah, I think the reason for having 2 blind shear rams is it's very difficult to shear the tool joint, which is the joint between the drill pipes. And so if you have them 4 feet apart, if one is on the drill tool joint, the other will be on the pipe, and it's much easier to shear that. The problem, though, is if you have the drill collar, which is the heavy part of the drill stem, in the blowout preventer, it's almost impossible to shear that.
Let me go on to the second question I have that really has to do with how additional research can be paid for. Certainly the industry has devoted billions of dollars for research, but it has largely focused on ways to increase production, not so much devoted to accident prevention and mitigation. So I guess my first question is how do we have a more balanced mix toward that? And the other is, I guess, models of how other countries are paying for this kind of research with regard to royalties, lease fees, and how that needs to be better put to use, particularly at a time in recent years when we've seen oftentimes record profits being reported from several companies in the industry. And let me start with Mr. Milito and we'll go on from there.
Recent information from National Science Foundation shows just what you've said, that there are 200+ billion spent in 2008 on R&D, among the $300 billion in capital expenditures in the industry. And while a lot of that is on production capabilities, when you're looking at the BOPs and drill ships and things like that, you're building those and designing them to have safety components embedded in the process. Along with that, the industry as a whole is working on best practices which provide the safety mechanisms to be in place as we move forward. That said, in the wake of this incident, we have to look at everything. We have to look at the opportunities and the needs to do further research to make sure that we're operating in a safe manner. So it's something we have to consider.
Mr. Pappas.
Thank you. You know, the European Union basically spends 2% of what it gets out of the ground, basically, and turns it back into R&D. The U.S. doesn't do anything near that. We have such a small percentage. From my understanding, royalties that the U.S. government retains is the second largest revenue producer after the IRS. We know that money isn't being reverted back to R&D in the energy industry. And in my opinion, it needs to be, because it's a priority. It's definitely a priority.
And excuse me, do you know what our percentage is? You said it was way under 2%.
I think it's 0.02% in the oil and gas business or something like that. So that's one point that I would make. The second point is it has to do with what percentage to put in to safety and environment versus ongoing productivity. And, you know, in my opinion, you need to have a healthy percentage. 10 to 15% probably should be at the very least. In an issue, when you have an issue like this, you need to throw a lot more at it, and you need to throw it at it very quickly. Not because you want a quick answer, but because you want the right answer soon. And the third question, if I'm not mistaken, had to do with how we fund this stuff and why the government doesn't fund, should fund more versus private companies. Private and public companies basically answer to their stakeholders and their stockholders. And what they look at is they look at R&D and technology development as it relates to economics for them. And that's a capitalist society and what we're in. What the government needs to do is they need to assist us to move on beyond that, to look at things that may not be economically viable as we see right now. And lo and behold, we may learn something. It may actually open up some doors, and it may actually improve it for everybody.
Okay. Any others on the panel? If not, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thanks, Mr. Carnahan. To my colleagues, we've been informed that we expect votes to start any moment now. Mr. Hall has notified me he has a brief question he wants to follow up. I have one brief one, and then unless there are other burning issues.
Mr. Chairman, I have just one very brief thing.
Well, how about we recognize Mr. Hall first, and then I'll recognize Mr. Rohrabacher, and then I'll finish.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, to Mr. Lujan, I say he had a lot of good questions, but they were really questions that ought to have been directed to the DOE, who could have answered them, but they chose not to show up. And Mr. Carnahan, I like him with this idea of how something has to be paid for, because way back 10 or 15 years ago, I was on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and we were looking for how to drill the depths of the Gulf. And with a lot of outside help, the major problem we had was how we were going to pay for it and what was there. And I sought a bill some 10 years before it was passed. It was passed into I believe the 2005 bill is when that last good energy bill was passed. It was supported by Democrats and Republicans, maybe mostly from the energy states, but it had support by both parties there. But they put my ultra deep in as an amendment. I tried to put it in for 10 years, and finally we got it in that bill. I based it on the fact that we at that time knew the energy was there, but we didn't have the technology to get it to the top. So Mr. Carnahan hits the ball right on the face of the ball when he says we need to have a way to pay for it. We detected a way to pay for it, to get people to do the technology for us, and it became a technology bill more so than an energy bill, with I think some 24 universities that were providing that technology. We paid them with the energy we got up from there that we couldn't have gotten up without their technology, and with their technology we could. And I think that is operating now. It's known as the Section 999 or the Ultra Deep Program. And Mr. Pappas, I think that you have some knowledge on that. I just want to ask you one quick question. I'd like for you to highlight some of the results of the R&D supported by the RPSEA and how it impacted our ability to conduct safe drilling. But I'll just get right to the point and ask you this. How and can the Section 999 program address technical challenges that improve deepwater drilling safety?
The safety side of the business, yes, sir. Well, we've got several projects that are ongoing right now that really look promising. One of them is a composite riser for ultra deep water, and what that would do is lighten the load, makes it easier to move, makes it safer, and makes it more environmentally friendly. Another one would be a fatigue performance analysis. We don't have a correct way to look at analysis of risers and drilling equipment. It doesn't seem to work in deep water right now. We use empirical equations. What we're trying to do is to get down to the fundamental physics here, and so that helps out a whole lot. I talked about the self-standing riser system. That has to do with interventions going back into wells that have been drilled and trying to help them out. There's no way of doing that economically right now, but what this does besides that is it gets you away from the heavy vessels, the heavy lifting that is necessary, so it improves the safety of the people that are on board doing those kinds of things. A hybrid power system study that is that we're looking at would use other types of power, such as wave energy and wind energy, to try to supplement some of the power that we need for the production, not necessarily for drilling, but for production of wells. So if you can try to combine some of these things, perhaps they make sense, so that we can go ahead and be more efficient in the way that we do business. So that's environmentally friendly in its own way.
Well, I might say that we had a lot of support, technical support, from men of industry just like you that are coming and giving you time here today, one of whom is in the audience here. That was great benefit to me as we pushed for this. I rode with President Bush out to New Mexico to sign the energy bill. My amendment was in that bill for the first time in 10 years. I felt good about it till when he was signing it, recognized me as standing behind him, as was there only to get some free coffee off of Air Force One. What he didn't know was I had 6 of his coffee mugs in my briefcase at that very time. But he signed that, and then later, because he got knocked around a lot by saying that he was supporting big energy firms, he turned and decided that he wanted to kill that bill and took a shot at us on the floor through Congressman Markey, which he was turned back with the help of Republicans and Democrats, some 245 votes to 161. And there'll be other assaults on that, but it's a safe, paid-for thrust that. And the gentleman on the end suggested maybe a moratorium on drilling. Maybe he means a moratorium on the dangerous type drilling, or the most ultra deep, and he probably has a foot to stand on there, but I can't understand anybody that wants just to whitewash all moratorium and knock out thousands and thousands of jobs right now to pursue a safety that they don't know whether it's safety or not. Because like you say, we won't know till we get there and get that out. We won't know why their 4 checks didn't work. But those are things that we'll find out. I yield back. I thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I have actually spoken to former President Bush about his decision, and he said, that'll teach Mr. Hall to steal my darn coffee cups.
He hadn't spoken to me since.
There's a take-home lesson here. Mr. Rohrabacher, and then I'll briefly ask a question, and we'll finish up time.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And again, I appreciate your leadership. Let's note that right here in this room, we had a hearing a couple weeks ago, and Kevin Costner was here, and he sat right over there where Mr. McCormack's sitting, and told us that he had put a considerable amount of investment of his own money into developing a technology that could have been put to use in doing what Mr. Baugh has described today, of sucking up oil and water and separating it. And but we are not now prepared to do that. But Kevin Costner, a decade ago, put his own money into that technology, and it sat there. It sat unused and not put into a place where we could now mobilize it to help us solve this disaster or come to grips with it. So That, number one, was what came out of that hearing, and the chairman and I want to note, met with Mr. Cosner later, and I think that, again, we must make sure we're doing our part here. And we're making sure that the Kevin Cosners of the world or the people in the oil business were doing their part, but we need to do our part here as well. And one of the things we need is to make sure the executive branch, this isn't just legislative branch, it is very disappointing that the Department of Energy was not here today to participate. There are some serious questions that needed to be asked, and they weren't here. But I think all of our witnesses presented some very fine ideas and insights, and I thank them, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rohrabacher. I share that concern. We hope to. We've got commitment from the executive branch to get the witness here, and we lament the absence as well. But I appreciate that the committee is focused on the witnesses who are here. I just want to thank my colleagues for their good questions, and then our witnesses. This issue of risk. You know, Mr. McCormack, you talked about the cumulative effects of small risks. You know, NASA some years ago, when they first started the moon mission, they set what appeared to be a microscopic probability of risk, and it was something like 1 out of 100,000. It was a really low number. And people said, why are you being so rigorous? And they said, you know how many parts there are on a spaceship? And you add those up, and even a little tiny valve fails, and that prevents hydraulic fluid from going somewhere else, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm concerned about that. But then I also, when we look at this, we too often in this institution say, well, how much money did you throw at it? That shows whether you care or not, okay? And I don't think we should do that. But conversely, if you throw relatively little money at something relative to everything else, it doesn't suggest a high priority. So when we look at RPSEA's expenditures, and you say, you know, you listed some things and they all sounded impressive, they seem to have safety as an artifact almost. Maybe it'll be a direct result. But how do we say going forward from here with RPSEA and API, look, we lost 11 lives. We're spending hundreds of billions of dollars over time on if you not hundreds of billions yet, but we're spending many billions, let's say that. How do we focus more on safety, and how do we know what we're doing is actually safety, and whether it's human factors and training, whether it's better physical technology? Dr. Baugh mentioned some improved shear technology. And as I listen to the shear things, it's like we've got the technology there, unless there's something in the way, which there often is, and then it doesn't work. So we need two of them, but there could also be something in the way of that second one, and then it doesn't work. That's not reassuring. How do we say, I mean, if we know that, if we know our safety equipment can be blocked from working, and yet we say to ourselves, we're reassured, it's like I have a smoke detector in my house with no batteries in it. Right. So educate me. How do we make sure RPSEA and API spend more attention so we're not here 5 years from now or 10 years from now doing the same thing?
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned earlier, we didn't realize we had a problem. The industry did not anyway. So we've come together, and I detailed three different scenarios that we could look at going forward. And you mentioned drilling down as a pun, but that's exactly what we've done. And we've come up with a list, and if I can read them out very quickly, okay?
Please do.
Blowout preventer inspection and enforcement procedures, including backup equipment and reporting requirements. Looking into all of these things, by the way. Well-controlled procedures, training programs, and/or response mechanisms for deepwater wells. Improved comprehensive safety management programs need to be looked at also. Emergency equipment certification, which was noted also, and testing improvements. Streamlined reporting systems to governmental agencies. Additional safety barriers during critical well construction stages, such as what we had. Well construction certification procedures for cement and tubular equipment. Standardized well construction procedures from wellhead to reservoir. Increased enforcement by government agencies, including the training and the development of additional personnel. These are the ones that we identified right off the bat that need to be looked at as a group, and we've got folks in place to look at those.
I thank you, and I thank all the witnesses. You know, did you want to add to that, Mr. Milito, please?
Well, I'm just going to point out that this is something industry is doing, but I think an important part of it is making sure that the regulators understand how the technology is advancing. And as part of our process, as part of Mr. Pappas's process, MMS, as the regulator, should be involved in that. They should be in our standards meetings so they can see how the industry is working together and what the technologies are so that the regs don't fall behind technology. In addition, they need to see what Mr. Pappas's group is doing so that the regulatory system is at that level, that it's not, we're not missing out on these opportunities.
And it would seem those regulators need to have, as Mr. McCormack pointed out, not only comparable levels of training, but also expertise in the specific type of environment that they're regulating, rather than saying we're going to take something from dry land, put it over on deep water, or shallow water onto deep water, different exigencies of the environment.
I agree.
I want to thank the witnesses. The reason we're having these hearings, and Mr. Gordon is working so hard, and all of my colleagues are, is we don't want to see this happen again. And if we're going to try to respond to this, we think we need to improve our research portfolio, how it focuses on this, and maybe our regulatory portfolio. We want to do so in a way that's responsible and informed, not just something for symbolic, we all feel good because we had a good, clever named bill. And your testimony today and your input will be incredibly helpful. And as always on this committee, the record will remain open for 2 weeks to give you all a chance to respond to any questions from members, or if you have additional information you want to submit, and also for any additional statements from members. With that, Mr. Hall has a final comment.
Yeah, I just want to say we'll miss Mr. English in this committee, but we're also going to miss Dr. Ehlers and Dr. Baird, who's been good guidance for us and helpful in encouraging, urging men and women like you to come and testify and give us your time. And we're going to miss you, Doctor, very much. I'll miss some of the trips that we didn't get to make that we always planned. But you've been a gentleman, and I have agreed with you, not 100% of the time, but when I didn't agree with you, well, you were probably wrong.
I'll accept that.
Or maybe I was the one that's wrong. Anyway, we thank you for your long service here, and
thank you,
look forward to working with you even after you're gone. Come on back. My door will always be open to you.
I'm honored by that. Thank you. Witnesses have done an outstanding job both in preparation and your presentation today. We're grateful for your service. Again, if there's any information we didn't cover in a limited time, feel free to let us know. Thank you. With that, the committee stands adjourned. Thanks to all my colleagues for their good questions and input.